Have you ever felt like someone was watching you, even from the comfort of your own home? What if that feeling wasn't just paranoia? In this chilling compilation, we dive into 10 true horror stories that push the boundaries of fear and reality. From obsessive stalkers to haunted ruins, from near-death encounters to ghostly apparitions, these tales remind us of one terrifying truth. Safety is often just an illusion. Ready to feel the fear? Story 1. The Girlfriend Trap. It was the fall of 2019 when I met Alyssa. I was living alone in a small but decent apartment in Fort Collins, Colorado. 24 years old, newly promoted at work, and finally feeling like I had a handle on adult life. Things were quiet, peaceful even. Most nights I made dinner for one, binged Netflix, maybe read a little before bed. I wasn't exactly lonely, but I was open to change. That change came in the form of Alyssa, whom I met through a mutual friend at a cozy coffee shop near campus. She was the kind of woman who made people pause, a quiet presence beautiful in a haunting way. Her dark hair framed a pale face, and her eyes held something unreadable, like there was always a second meaning behind every glance. Our first conversation was short, but it lingered with me longer than it should have. We started seeing each other casually at first, a few late-night walks, coffee dates, movies, hiking trails through the nearby foothills. She laughed at my jokes in that soft, almost embarrassed way that made me feel like I was pulling her out of some private world. There was an ease between us, an early comfort I hadn't felt in years. She seemed grounded, intelligent, and strangely content with silence. Over time, I found myself wanting to learn more about her, but Alyssa remained vague on details. She never spoke much about her family or her past, brushing off my curiosity with smiles or sudden shifts in conversation. At the time, I told myself not to pry. Everyone has baggage, I thought. Maybe she just wasn't ready. It didn't seem like a red flag, at least not then. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. As the weeks turned into months, Alyssa and I grew closer, but something about her never quite fit. She never invited me to her place, said it was messy or under renovation, and she never once introduced me to a single friend or family member. Whenever I asked, she'd smile and say something like, "I don't really keep in touch with anyone these days," before deftly changing the subject. I tried not to push. Everyone has a past they'd rather leave behind. But there was a strange rhythm to her detachment, like she had trained herself to dodge deeper connection. Then came the staring. At first I didn't notice it as anything more than idle attention, those moments when she thought I wasn't looking, and her eyes would linger, unblinking. But it wasn't the affectionate kind of gaze lovers share. Her expression was flat, unreadable. No smile, no warmth, just intensity. When I caught her, she would look away, or smile as if nothing had happened, but the feeling stuck to me like a cold draft under a locked door. Soon, the boundaries began to blur. Alyssa started showing up at my apartment without warning. Sometimes it was late, midnight or later, and I'd find her parked outside in her car, engine off, just sitting there. She'd claim she just wanted to see me, but something about the way she appeared without texting, without calling, made my skin crawl. One night I woke up at 3 a.m. and walked to the kitchen for a glass of water. As I passed by the front window, a subtle shape caught my eye across the street. I leaned closer and froze. It was her car, parked in complete silence, and I could barely make out her silhouette behind the wheel, facing my apartment, eyes locked on my window. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. My mind ran wild, but I rationalized it away like I always did. Maybe she missed me. Maybe she was just a little clingy. The next afternoon I brought it up, gently. She smiled, even laughed, and said she liked surprising me. Her voice Had that tone, sweet, dismissive, almost mocking, and I remember laughing with her just to keep things light. Even though a part of me was screaming that none of this was normal, it escalated quickly from there. Just a week later, I came home to find her sitting on the stairs outside my apartment. She looked nervous, twitchy even. When I asked if everything was okay, she stood up so suddenly it startled me. She said I had to come with her, right now. No explanation, just urgency in her voice and a tense smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her car idled at the curb, its door slightly ajar. Everything in me recoiled. I asked her to explain what was going on, but she wouldn't. When I said I wasn't going anywhere without answers, her expression shifted, subtly but unmistakably, from anxious to quietly angry. She turned without a word, got in her car, and sped away. I stood in the silence of my apartment stairwell long after Alyssa drove off, heart pounding, replaying her expression over and over again in my head. That mix of cold disappointment and restrained fury, it wasn't something I'd seen on her before, but it felt practiced. I tried to go about my evening like nothing had happened, but every time I glanced toward the window, I half expected to see her car parked there again. For the first time since we started dating, I locked every door and window in my apartment and double-checked them before bed. 2 nights later, I received a text message from an unknown number. It read, "Stay away from Alyssa. She's not who you think she is." That was it, no name, no context, just that cryptic skin-crawling warning. I texted back immediately, "Who is this?" followed by, "What do you mean?" but got no reply. I called the number. Straight to voicemail. I tried calling Alyssa. Same thing. That night, I didn't sleep. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, heart racing, straining to hear every sound from outside. At around 2:01 a.m., I heard slow, deliberate footsteps approaching my front door. They stopped just outside. Then came the sound of the doorknob rattling, softly at first, then slightly more insistent. Whoever was on the other side was trying to open it. When the lock didn't give, the footsteps receded, but not far. I crept to the window, hands trembling, and peeked through the blinds. There she was, Alyssa, or whoever she really was. She was hurrying down the block, her form lit briefly by a passing car's headlights. 2 other people were waiting for her in a parked vehicle a block away. She slipped inside and the car pulled off. I stumbled back from the window, breath shallow. My instincts had been right. This wasn't just clinginess or heartbreak. This was something else, something darker. The next morning, I scoured her name online, both Alyssa and the phone number she had originally given me. I dug through old posts, public records, even obscure forums. Hours in, I found a news article buried in a local Nebraska site from 2 years ago. The headline hit me like a punch to the chest. 3 arrested in attempted kidnapping ring. Female suspect released due to lack of evidence. The article included a photo of the woman. Same face, different hair. Her name wasn't Alyssa. It was Leah. The story detailed how she and 2 male accomplices lured victims by posing as friendly acquaintances. They'd charm, isolate, and eventually coerce people into cars, many of whom were never seen again. Leah had walked free. My blood turned to ice. I called the Fort Collins police, explained everything, gave them her photo, the news link, even the strange text. They took a report and told me to keep my doors locked and avoid all contact. That was the moment it fully sank in. I hadn't dodged a bad relationship. I had narrowly escaped abduction. The following days were a blur of fear and hypervigilance. I barely slept, barely ate. I kept all the lights on at night, curtains drawn, doors locked. Every sound outside felt like a threat. Alyssa's car never reappeared, but that didn't stop the gnawing anxiety. I started parking blocks away from my apartment, changing up my routine, watching every face on the street like it might be hers in disguise. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe it was over. Maybe the police presence scared them off. Maybe they had moved on to someone else. But deep down I knew better. A week after my report, another text arrived from a new number. This one was colder, more direct. "You shouldn't have told the police, big mistake. No punctuation, just a threat laid bare." I didn't respond. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I packed a bag, got in my car, and drove to a friend's place in Loveland. I didn't even tell him why. Just asked if I could crash for a few nights. I spent hours staring out the window, flinching at headlights, jumping at every knock or creak. Eventually, I stopped hearing from her. Months passed. No more texts. No sightings. But the fear never fully left. Then one day I saw another news article. Leah, her real name, had been arrested again along with 2 men after attempting to kidnap a college student near my old neighborhood. The article mentioned their phones had been recovered and analyzed. They found lists, photos, names, addresses. My name was among them. That broke me in a way nothing else had. I hadn't just imagined the danger, I'd been marked, targeted, stalked. I moved to another state after that, started over, but even now, a year later, I still check the rear view, mirror with dread, because monsters like her don't just disappear, they wait. Story 2. The Man with Two Faces. This happened to my mum when she was just 19 during her college break. She had picked up a temporary job at a small PCO and STD call office in our hometown, an unassuming place that shared a building with a real estate office. It wasn't a glamorous gig, but it paid decently and allowed her to stay busy over the holidays. The office was minimal, barely more than a front desk, a phone booth or 2, and some filing cabinets. She mostly worked alone during the day, with her boss tucked away in his personal office next door. The streets outside were usually quiet, except for a few locals coming in to make calls or drop off documents. One ordinary afternoon, a man walked in. He looked to be in his late 50s, with a full white beard, white hair, and a navy blue shirt. He asked to use the phone. Nothing strange. But after his call, he didn't leave right away. Instead, he lingered by her desk and started making casual small talk. He was polite, maybe a little too friendly. He asked if she was related to the boss. When she said no, he smiled and began complimenting her, saying she was far too educated and pretty to be working in a small place like this. Then he said something that made her pause. He claimed to have connections at a prestigious bank and could help her get a much better job. All she had to do was bring her resume to his home. At first, my mom hesitated. The idea of going to a stranger's home didn't sit right with her. But he spoke with such confidence, such practiced ease, that she found herself nodding along. He claimed his father was ill and being cared for by a servant at home, and that she needn't worry. He lived just across the street in a newer, upscale building where only wealthy families stayed. He even handed her his phone number and told her not to mention anything to her boss, since he wouldn't want her current employer to think she was looking to leave. Somehow it all sounded reasonable in the moment. She agreed to visit after her shift, thinking she would just talk and be on her way. That evening she walked across the road as planned, clutching her bag, and resumed with cautious optimism. In the building's courtyard she saw the man again, but something was different. His hair and beard were no longer white, they were jet black. He now wore a casual t-shirt and stood beside a woman with 2 children in school uniforms. For a moment, she doubted it was even the same man, but he waved at her, smiling. The sight of the family calmed her nerves. The man introduced her to the woman and kids in a friendly tone, leading my mum to assume they were his wife and children. They all entered the elevator together. When it stopped on the 4th floor, the woman and children stepped out, and my mum instinctively began to follow. But the woman smiled and said, "Not this one," before walking away. The man remained inside. his smile now more restrained. On the 9th floor, they exited, and he led her down a dim corridor toward his apartment. Children played nearby in the hallway, which gave her a brief sense of comfort. The man opened the door, inviting her inside. She stepped into a clean but oddly sterile living room with white walls, an L-shaped sofa, and a teapot next to a cold drink bottle. A box of black hair dye and a brush sat conspicuously on the table, confirming what she already suspected. He had changed his appearance. He asked if she minded if he closed the door. She politely declined. He laughed but didn't press. Then he offered to show her the rest of the apartment before discussing the job. Against her better judgment, she agreed and followed him deeper into the unfamiliar space. The moment she stepped into the hallway beside the living room, my mom felt the mood shift. The air was cooler, the walls darker, and none of the lights in the corridor were on. The man walked ahead, opening a door on the left. "This is the bedroom," he said casually. She peeked in, but her breath caught when she saw what looked like a camera tripod positioned directly in front of the bed. The windows were shut, the curtains drawn, and the room felt strangely staged, like a set rather than a living space. She asked where his father and the caretaker were, and without hesitation, he replied that they had gone out to a doctor's appointment. The answer felt rehearsed. If he knew they wouldn't be home, why invite her over to meet them? A growing sense of dread coiled in her stomach. She nodded silently and turned back toward the living room, murmuring something about getting to the job discussion. He followed close behind, pulling a chair in front of hers and sitting down with a relaxed air that felt more predatory than polite. He asked if she'd like a drink, gesturing to the teapot with the cold drink bottle, and she declined firmly. Still, he disappeared into the kitchen for a moment, returning with 2 glasses already filled. He handed her one and insisted with a coaxing smile that she try it. She took the glass but didn't sip, offering a forced smile and placing it carefully on the table beside her. As he continued talking about Dubai, about lavish apartments and strict laws, he suddenly reached out and grabbed her hand. The E gesture was jarring, abrupt, and he laughed nervously as he explained how thieves in Dubai had their hands cut off, mimicking the motion with her wrist. Her skin crawled. She pulled back, feigning a laugh, heart pounding beneath her composed exterior. He rose from his chair and stepped toward the front door, still talking about nonsense, but positioned himself so he blocked the only exit. For a terrifying moment, she realized that if he chose to lunge, there would be no one to hear her scream. Then, as if summoned by fate, the sound of voices echoed from the corridor. 2 women stepped out of their apartments, calling to their children. The momentary distraction shifted his attention, and my mum didn't hesitate. She stood, offered a quick excuse about needing to return home, and practically ran out the door before he could react. Her heart didn't stop racing until she was halfway down the stairs. When my mum finally made it home, her legs still trembling, she didn't tell anyone what had happened. She didn't want to worry her parents, and she certainly didn't want anyone thinking she had made a foolish decision. But the next day at work, her boss, who usually kept to himself in his office, approached her unexpectedly. In a low voice, he asked, "Did you speak with that man yesterday?" Startled, she nodded. His eyes darkened. "Did he do anything inappropriate?" She hesitated, then said no. He nodded but warned her sternly, "Stay away from him. He's not who he pretends to be. Don't go anywhere with him. Ever." She didn't ask how he knew. Something in his voice told her not to. Her final week at the job passed without incident. But on her last day, as she walked home, she saw the man again, standing outside the same building, eyes scanning the street. When he spotted her, he motioned for his servant, a younger man, to follow her. The servant tried to convince her to talk to him again, insisting he had important things to say. She refused and hurried into a taxi. That night she promised herself she'd never return to that street again. Years later, long after she married my father, she came across a newspaper article about a man in another city arrested for drugging and blackmailing young women. The photo showed the same face, though older. He had done it before, and he would have done it to her if those women in the hallway hadn't appeared. Story 3. Something Lives Upstairs. It happened about 20 years ago, but even now the memory unsettles me more than I care to admit. I had just moved in with my dad and older sister in rural southern Maine. My parents had divorced a couple years earlier, and while I had stayed with my mom at first, I eventually chose to relocate after high school to live with my father and sister full-time. Their home was nestled in a quiet, heavily wooded area, an old 2-story farmhouse with a basement, attic, and a long wraparound porch. It had a sort of rustic charm with squeaky floors and windows that groaned during storms. It was the kind of place that felt like it belonged in a painting, until you stayed in it long enough to hear what lived in the silence. The house had originally been built for my now ex-stepmother, who had since left our lives. She was the kind of woman who filled a room with tension. Even after she was gone, there was something about that house that still carried her presence. My sister had already been living there for a year, and she didn't seem fazed. I, on the other hand, was less convinced. I was assigned the bedroom next to hers on the second floor. It was a decent room, quiet and warm, but there was one strange thing. The only access to the attic was through my sister's closet. We rarely talked about it then, but even back in those first few days, I remember feeling like something was waiting above us. It started subtly, like most things that wear on your nerves, until you can no longer ignore them. During the first week, I'd occasionally hear faint noises coming from the ceiling above. Soft, hurried taps like the scrambling of tiny feet across the attic floorboards. My sister joked that it was attic gnomes or squirrels, though she never seemed fully convinced by her own explanations. Our dad brushed it off every time we mentioned it, insisting it was just the old house settling. But the sounds got louder, more distinct. What began as scuttles evolved into pronounced creaks, the kind you only get from wooden planks shifting under actual weight. There were nights I'd lie in bed holding my breath, listening as something paced slowly back and forth in the attic, just above my head. One time, I even heard what sounded like a dragging noise, something heavy being pulled across the floor. Still, no one else seemed particularly alarmed. Then doors started opening on their own. It happened first with the hallway closet, swinging open just enough to be noticeable whenever no one was around. Then my bedroom door, once stubborn due to the old frame, began to creak open during the night despite being firmly shut before I slept. One evening, while watching TV downstairs with my sister, we both heard the unmistakable creak of her closet door opening upstairs. We paused, looked at each other, and said nothing. It was as if neither of us wanted to give power to the idea, forming silently between us. The most unsettling moment came one night when I was alone in the living room reading. The house was quiet. Then I heard the attic door swing open, slow and deliberate, followed by 3 long steps across the attic floor. I sat frozen, unable to move, every hair on my body raised. I waited, hoping I had imagined it. But then came a 4th step, then a 5th. I bolted up the stairs and found the attic door ajar, the hallway empty. My sister, who'd just returned from work, saw my pale face and asked what happened. I told her. She didn't laugh. Instead, she told me that for the past 2 nights, she'd been sleeping with her closet door jammed shut with a chair. Something had been opening it in the middle of the night. That was the first time we truly acknowledged that whatever was going on in the attic, it wasn't in our heads. The night everything came to a head started like any other. My sister and I were downstairs, watching late-night television while our dad slept soundly in his bedroom on the ground floor. Around midnight, she yawned, said goodnight, and made her way upstairs. I stayed behind, too engrossed in the show to follow. About 10 minutes later, I heard footsteps descending from the second floor. Slow, deliberate, heavy. I assumed my sister had forgotten something and didn't think much of it until I heard the basement door creak open. Confused, I stood up and walked toward the hallway. The basement lights were off, but the door was ajar. I called out but got no answer. Goosebumps prickled my arms as I flipped the light switch. The stairs illuminated slowly, revealing nothing. No movement, no sound, just that eerie stillness that feels like it's holding its breath. I shut the door and went upstairs, suddenly uneasy. In my room, I made sure to close the door firmly. It had always been difficult to shut completely, but I gave it a strong tug and felt the familiar resistance as it latched. I tried to sleep, but at around 1 in the morning, I shot awake to the sound of footsteps, fast, urgent, climbing the stairs. They reached the second floor and charged down the hallway toward my sister's room. Her door creaked open, then slammed shut. I bolted upright, my heart hammering. Then came more footsteps, this time rushing toward me. Something slammed violently into my door, rattling it in its frame. I jumped out of bed, frozen, paralyzed with fear. The footsteps retreated as quickly as they'd come. I opened my door just as my sister opened hers. We both stared at each other in stunned silence. She whispered, "Are you messing with me?" And I could see the fear in her eyes. I shook my head, and her lips quivered as she replied, "Because I thought you were." She said she had been awoken by the sound of her closet door opening and the attic hatch being thrown open. She heard something run up into the attic. Then she heard the same footsteps above her head, moving toward the tiny attic window that overlooked the porch roof. And then, this is the part I'll never forget, we both heard a loud, dull thud from outside, like something heavy had jumped or fallen onto the roof below. We rushed to the window, peered into the darkness, and saw nothing, just empty shingles bathed in moonlight. But something had been up there, and it had jumped. After that night, everything changed. My sister and I no longer felt safe in that house, not in our rooms, not even during the day. We installed a lock on the attic door and began locking our bedroom doors every night. I stopped cracking my window open, even on hot nights. Though the violent activity stopped, we still heard faint creaks above us from time to time, like quiet reminders that it hadn't gone away entirely. About a year later, our dad finally decided to sell the place. We didn't argue. The day we moved out felt like shedding a skin we never wanted to wear again. Years later, I asked a neighbor about the house. She hesitated before telling me it had once belonged to a woman known for violent outbursts. She died alone in the original cottage that stood on the same land. Some say her spirit never left. I believe them. I lived beneath her footsteps. Story 4. The Man in the Window. Back in early 2020, just before the world turned upside down, I started a part-time babysitting job for a single father named Jonathan Morales. He lived in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Denver, Colorado, raising his 4-year-old daughter Bella on his own after losing his wife in a car accident the year before. Jonathan worked long hours at an IT firm downtown and needed someone to watch Bella in the evenings a couple nights a week. It wasn't my main job. I had a part-time admin role at a logistics company, but the extra money helped with student loans. Besides, Bella was a dream to look after. She was bright, curious, and surprisingly articulate for her age. She loved drawing pictures of animals, lining up her stuffed toys for imaginary tea parties, and asking 100 questions before bedtime. Jonathan was kind, respectful, and always made sure I was comfortable. The job felt safe, predictable, even sweet in a way. On the night it all began, March 4th, if memory serves, everything started as normal. Jonathan had a late work shift and left around 6, apologizing as usual for the inconvenience. I reassured him it was no problem. Bella and I had a great evening, coloring, baking cookies, and watching a kids' show before bath time. She seemed a little more affectionate than usual, clinging to my arm as I tucked her into bed beneath the glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling. I didn't think much of it at the time, but maybe I should have. About half an hour after Bella had gone to sleep, I was curled up on the living room couch, flipping through channels with the volume low, when I heard her voice call out from upstairs. It wasn't frightened, just small and uncertain. "Hello?" I paused the TV and walked down the hallway toward her room. Bella was standing by the window, her tiny frame silhouetted in the glow of her nightlight. She turned to me with wide eyes and whispered, "There was a man outside. He was looking at me through the window." My heart sank. I hurried to the window and peeked out but saw nothing. The backyard was quiet, dimly lit by a single motion sensor light above the porch. I reassured her gently, telling her it was probably just her imagination or maybe a shadow. Still, I closed the curtains tightly and promised to check the rest of the house. She clung to me for a moment before finally settling back into bed. I checked every window and door, making sure they were locked, even though they already were. The house was quiet again, but my nerves had started to itch. Bella wasn't the kind of kid to make up stories, especially not ones that left her visibly shaken. I returned to the living room but couldn't relax. About 15 minutes later, I heard her crying, loud and panicked. I ran upstairs and found her sitting up in bed, tears streaking her face. "He came back," she sobbed. "He was watching again." My stomach twisted as I looked at the window. The curtains were still closed, but a narrow gap where they didn't fully meet left just enough space to see outside. I stepped forward and carefully peeked through. Still nothing. But her fear was real, and now it was crawling under my skin too. I sat beside her, wrapped her in a blanket, and promised to stay close. Then, despite the tightness in my chest, I grabbed a kitchen knife and stepped outside to check. The yard was cold and empty, the light casting long shadows across the grass. I circled the house, nothing but quiet trees, scattered toys, and darkness. I started to convince myself it had just been a bad dream, some mixture of grief and imagination. But the second I locked the back door and stepped into the living room, I heard the front door handle rattle. Not a knock, not a breeze. Someone was trying to get in. I froze where I stood, knife still gripped in my hand, heart hammering so loudly I was sure whoever was outside could hear it. The front door handle jiggled again, more forcefully this time. Someone was trying to open it, no hesitation, no pretense of a mistake. I stepped toward the peephole and looked through, squinting into the dimly lit porch. A man stood there. He was tall, wearing a dirty hoodie and jeans, his posture tense and jerky. His face was turned just enough for me to catch a glimpse of his features, wild eyes, messy, matted hair, and the kind of expression that made your blood freeze. He didn't knock or say anything. He just stood there staring at the door, fingers twitching. Then, without warning, he slammed both hands against it, shaking the hinges. Bella screamed upstairs. I shouted through the door that I was calling the police and that they needed to leave immediately. For a brief second, he stopped, head tilted like he was listening. Then he reached for the handle again, twisting it harder this time. My hands shook as I dialed 911, my voice breaking as I gave them the address. The operator kept me on the line, told me to stay calm and stay where I was. I backed away slowly, holding the knife like it might actually do something if he broke through. Then, just as suddenly as he'd appeared, he ran. I caught a glimpse of him darting across the yard, disappearing into the night, like a shadow slipping between trees. Within minutes, flashing red and blue lights lit up the windows. The police swept the yard and found him crouched behind a bush near the fence. half hidden, eyes wide with a mix of confusion and something darker. They tackled him, cuffed him, and dragged him to the squad car as he mumbled incoherently. One of the officers told me he'd escaped from a nearby mental health facility earlier that day. He hadn't hurt anyone, yet, but his behavior had become increasingly erratic and dangerous. I stood on the porch clutching Bella, who clung to me like a lifeline, her small body trembling in my arms. When Jonathan finally got home an hour later, he collapsed to his knees, scooping Bella into his arms and apologizing over and over again. I told him it wasn't his fault, but in that moment, I realized how close we'd come to disaster. The man in the window hadn't been a nightmare. He had been real, and he had chosen that house. Bella slept in her father's room that night, curled up with her favorite stuffed animal, finally at peace. But I couldn't sleep, not with the image of that man's face burned into my memory. Even after the police took him away, the house still felt wrong. The shadows stretched a little longer, the silence pressed harder against the walls. Days later, I learned from a follow-up call that the man had no known connection to the Morales family. He wasn't targeting them, at least not specifically. He'd simply wandered from house to house until something or someone caught his attention. That was somehow worse. It meant there was no motive, no logic, just chaos in human form. I never babysat for them again, though I stayed in touch. Years later, whenever I hear a tap at a window or a knock at the door late at night, I still feel my breath catch, because I'll never stop wondering, what if he hadn't run? Story 5. Roosevelt Elementary. About 6 months ago, my best friend Ben and I launched a small urban exploration YouTube channel called American Urban Explorers. We were both adrenaline junkies in our own way, drawn to forgotten spaces and the eerie stillness of abandoned buildings. Based in western Pennsylvania, we'd already explored crumbling steel mills near Pittsburgh and decaying farmhouses tucked deep into back roads. But then we heard about Roosevelt Elementary, a school in a small town called Maplewood just north of the city. The place had been shut down for over 2 decades and sat near a defunct set of train tracks, far from main roads and casual foot traffic. Locals whispered that it was haunted, that lights sometimes flickered at night and faint voices could be heard behind its walls. Most people avoided it. Naturally, we were intrigued. We planned our visit for a crisp November afternoon. Armed with flashlights, a decent camera, and backup batteries, we parked down a nearby side street and approached the school on foot. The building loomed behind a rusting chain-link fence, its red brick exterior covered in ivy and graffiti. Most of the windows were shattered, the front door boarded over, except one panel near the bottom corner had come loose. We slipped through. The smell inside was immediately oppressive: mildew, rot, and old wood. Dust hung heavy in the air like ash. Ben grinned as he hit record, whispering, "Welcome to Roosevelt Elementary," while I scanned the dark hallway ahead, already feeling a tightness in my chest I couldn't explain. The deeper we ventured into Roosevelt Elementary, the more the building seemed to breathe with its own quiet unease. Our footsteps echoed over cracked linoleum and scattered debris, the silence broken only by the occasional creak of old beams or the crunch of broken glass under our boots. Lockers lined the hallway like metal coffins, their doors rusted and hanging at odd angles. Some were still stuffed with forgotten belongings: crumpled papers, torn textbooks, even a dusty pair of sneakers that looked eerily untouched. Ben was in his element, narrating for the camera, swinging his flashlight dramatically over murals of smiling cartoon children now warped by mold and peeling paint. But I couldn't shake the growing heaviness in my chest. Something about the place felt wrong, not just abandoned, but violated. As we passed by the main office, I noticed a faint dragging sound from down the hall. We stopped. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Ben nodded, immediately turning the camera toward the darkness. The sound stopped. We waited. Nothing. Probably. "It's a loose shutter or a raccoon," Ben whispered. Though his voice had lost some of its bravado, we pressed on. A few rooms later, we entered a classroom where the blackboard still had faded chalk writing from what must have been decades ago. Names, a spelling list, the word Monday written in shaky cursive. It was like time had just stopped. Then, from somewhere around the corner came another noise, not scraping this time, but a dull thud. I swung my flashlight toward the hallway, but it barely pierced the black. "We're not alone," I muttered. Ben raised the camera again and gave me a look, equal parts curiosity and caution. We stepped out together, each of us hyper-aware of every sound, every flicker of movement. That's when we saw it, a faint glow, maybe from a flashlight or lantern, spilling out from a classroom at the far end of the hallway. Someone was there. A silhouette stood inside the room, hunched, over, facing away from us. He wore a tattered jacket and jeans, hair matted and unkempt. I whispered, "Homeless." But something about the way he stood, too still, too rigid, made my skin crawl. Ben cleared his throat gently to announce our presence. The figure didn't move. Then slowly it turned. His eyes locked onto ours, wide, unfocused, shining unnaturally in the light. A crooked grin spread across his face, and in that moment I felt something primal and wrong coil in my gut. He started walking toward us, not running, but with deliberate steps. That was all I needed. I whispered, "Run." The moment that word left my lips, Ben and I turned on our heels and bolted, our flashlights bouncing wildly as we sprinted down the dark corridor. Behind us, we could hear him, the man, whatever he was, breaking into a run, his footsteps slapping against the cracked linoleum in a relentless, unnatural rhythm. I didn't dare look back. The building, once silent and still, now seemed to echo with chaos. The shadows twisted around us, our breathing ragged, adrenaline surging like fire through our veins. Ben nearly tripped over a fallen desk, stumbling, before catching himself, and I grabbed his arm, dragging him forward. We reached the foyer in seconds that felt like minutes. I could hear the man's heavy breathing behind us, felt the weight of his presence like hot breath on the back of my neck. We dove toward the boarded front door where we had entered. Just a sliver of space left between two loosened planks. Ben slipped through first, dropping the camera as he scrambled to the other side. I squeezed through next, my jacket snagging on a nail as I tore myself free. We didn't stop. We ran until we reached the chain-link fence, clawed our way through the gap, and finally burst out onto the empty street, gasping for air. Only then did I glance back at the school. It stood there silently, its windows like black, watching eyes. The man hadn't followed us out. There was no sign of him, just darkness behind the broken boards. We didn't speak until we reached the car. Ben's hands were shaking as he started the engine. I retrieved the camera from his lap. It had kept recording, but most of what it captured was a blur of movement, shadow and breathless panic. Still, in one frame, we caught a glimpse of him, just a flicker, frozen mid-stride. His expression was twisted in that same grin, his eyes wide with something wild, something unhinged. We debated whether to post the footage at all. In the end, we edited the video, cut out the most terrifying moments, and uploaded a shortened version titled "Abandoned School Nightmare in Pennsylvania." It went viral within days. People loved the mystery, but what they didn't know, what we never said, was that something in that school was waiting. Not just a man, not just a squatter, something that had been watching us from the moment we stepped through that loose plank, and it had almost caught us. In the weeks that followed, neither of us could sleep well. Every creak in our apartments, every flicker of shadow outside a window set our nerves on edge. Eventually, the town boarded up Roosevelt Elementary more securely, and a few months later, The building was scheduled for demolition. On the day the bulldozers arrived, Ben and I drove past one last time. We sat in silence as we watched the brick walls crumble, the roof cave in, the past reduced to rubble. It should have felt like closure, but it didn't. If anything, it only sharpened the memory. That man, if he was even just a man, had looked at us with something more than madness in his eyes. Something knowing. Something ancient. And even now I still wake in the middle of the night sometimes, convinced I'll hear footsteps echoing down a dark hallway. Because some places don't want to be forgotten, and some never let you go. Story 6. The Last Drive. It was supposed to be just another Saturday night. I'd spent most of the day at my grandparents' house, catching up over dinner and helping with small chores. By the time I got home, I was already feeling the usual pressure to join the weekly tradition. Saturday nights are for the boys, as my friends always said. Despite feeling a bit tired, I went through the motions. Quick shower, clean shirt, decent shoes, keys in hand. The plan was simple. Meet the guys at a nightclub about 30 minutes away, blow off some steam, maybe grab a few drinks. I wasn't in the mood, but I didn't want to be the one to bail. So I climbed into my SUV, started the engine, and hit the road just before 9 p.m. The highway was quiet for a weekend, traffic flowing smoothly under the cold glow of streetlights. Music played softly through my speakers, and I let my mind drift, thinking about the night ahead. I didn't know it then, but this would be the last time I ever sat behind the wheel. Somewhere past the 15-minute mark, a flash of red and blue lights caught my eye from the opposite side of the median. A police cruiser sat parked at an angle, facing traffic. I thought nothing of it at the time, just another speed trap. But moments later, I felt a sickening jolt beneath the car. A heavy impact. Something large, something living, and everything changed. The moment I felt the impact, a cold wave of dread surged through my chest. I knew instantly that it wasn't just road debris. I had hit something big, something that shouldn't have been there. My hands began to tremble on the steering wheel as I eased my foot off the gas, pulling over to the shoulder with shaking fingers. My hazard lights blinked in the darkness like a warning too late. I couldn't breathe. My thoughts were a blur of panic, guilt, and disbelief. Had it been a person? An animal? I hadn't seen anything until it was too late. The blinding headlights of oncoming traffic had left me momentarily disoriented, and whatever I'd struck had appeared from nowhere. I reached for my phone with numb fingers and dialed 911, my voice cracking as I reported the accident. But the operator already seemed to know. She calmly told me officers were already at the scene. An officer on the opposite side had witnessed the incident and radioed it in. That was when the full weight of what happened hit me. I had run someone over. I don't remember the drive to the police station, only that every second felt surreal. I filled out paperwork in a daze, gave a statement, and nodded numbly as officers explained that there would be an investigation, but that I wasn't being charged, at least not yet. The guilt didn't wait for legal clarity. It hit hard and fast. That night, I didn't go to the club. I didn't tell my friends anything more. Then something happened. I went home, curled up on my bed, and cried myself to sleep. Over the following days, details emerged. The victim's name was Brent Thompson, a 28-year-old man with a troubled history. He had been pulled over earlier that night for expired tags, panicked and fled on foot. A pursuing officer had deployed a taser as Brent ran across the highway. He collapsed seconds before I reached that stretch of road. The timing was tragic, the collision unavoidable. According to the DA, I bore no legal fault. But legal absolution didn't stop the nightmares. I saw Brent's face in my sleep, though I'd never seen it in person. I imagined the sound of his body under my wheels, even though I had music playing. I avoided my car. Then I avoided driving altogether. Friends offered support, but they didn't understand. How could they? I hadn't just been behind the wheel that night. I had been the weapon. And even if no one blamed me, I couldn't stop blaming myself. Weeks passed, but the guilt never faded. It only settled deeper into my bones, reshaping my routines and isolating me from the life I once knew. I stopped going out, stopped answering calls from friends who didn't know what to say anymore. The very thought of sitting behind a steering wheel filled me with nausea. Just looking at my parked SUV made my pulse spike. I started relying on rideshares or walking miles just to avoid the panic attacks that came with turning a key in the ignition. I eventually began therapy, twice a week at first, then once a week, and even that felt like too much some days. I couldn't talk about it without choking on the words, and when I finally did, I felt worse afterward, like reliving it only made the reality sharper. My therapist said what I was experiencing was survivor's guilt. But that phrase didn't fit. I hadn't survived something, I'd caused it. That distinction mattered, it haunted me. The turning point, if you could call it that, came when I asked to meet Brent's family. I didn't expect forgiveness. I just needed to say the words, to tell them I was sorry. The meeting was arranged through a grief counselor, and when the day arrived, I felt like I was walking to my own sentencing. Brent's mother and sister were there, and to my surprise, they were kind, gentle in a way I didn't think I deserved. I told them everything, what I remembered, what I felt, what I feared. I expected rage, grief, maybe tears. But instead, they listened. Brent's mother cried, yes, but when I apologized, really apologized, she took my hand and said, I don't blame you. He made choices that led to that night. You just happened to be there. That moment shattered something inside me. Not in a bad way, but like a dam breaking, letting all the pain I'd held in finally spill out. We sat together for hours. It didn't erase the weight I carried, but it gave me a place to set it down, even if just for a little while. For the first time since the accident, I felt like maybe healing wasn't betrayal, maybe living wasn't forgetting. Life after the accident never returned to what it was before, but it slowly became something new. I moved closer to my workplace, choosing a small apartment within walking distance of everything I needed. I never drove again. Friends gently encouraged me to try, even offered to sit beside me, but I couldn't bring myself to turn the key. That part of me had shut down. Instead, I focused on rebuilding in quiet ways, through therapy, through journaling, through volunteering, at a local youth center where I spoke about responsibility, choices, and how one moment can change everything. It didn't fix what happened, but it gave me purpose again. I still think of Brent often. Once a year, on the anniversary, I visit the site of the accident. I bring flowers. I stand there in silence as cars rush by, and I remember not just the horror of that night, but the lesson it carved into my soul, that life is fragile, that guilt can grow in the dark, and that sometimes healing doesn't mean forgetting, it just means learning to live with the scar. Brent is gone, but he changed me, and I carry that with me, always. Story 7, Miss Andre's Shadow. It happened back in 2016 when I was in the 7th grade and living in New York City. I was just a regular kid, headphones always on, stressed about homework, and trying to survive middle school. Miss Andre was my math teacher that year, and to be honest, I didn't like her, none of us did. She gave us way too much homework, treated us like we were already in college, and always seemed cold, like she didn't care if we were drowning in assignments or stress. Still, I never thought about her outside of class. Not until the Friday, before President's Day break, That afternoon, I boarded my usual school bus and took the window seat, zoning out to music. As we sat at a red light halfway home, I glanced outside, and there she was, Miss Andre, standing on the sidewalk, staring directly at me. Not just glancing, not in passing, staring, her face locked in this strange, stiff expression like she was angry or focused. It startled me. I quickly looked away, telling myself it was just a weird coincidence. New York's huge. There was no way she was following me. Besides, the windows were tinted, so maybe she wasn't even sure it was me. I brushed it off, but that night I kept replaying her face in my mind. That blank, cold expression. The next time I saw her, it wasn't at school, and it wasn't in daylight. The next time I saw her was the following evening at a Muse concert in New Jersey. My family and a few cousins had gone together. It was supposed to be a fun night. Loud music, bright lights, and a break from the stress of school. For a while it was. We were in the middle of the crowd when I saw her, Miss Andre, standing on the stage, not walking across or waving to anyone, just appearing. 1 second she wasn't there, and the next she was perfectly still, facing me. Her clothes weren't the usual teacher attire either. It looked like the same outfit she wore the day before, as if she hadn't changed. Her expression was exactly the same too, tight, focused, almost furious. I froze. No one else in the crowd reacted. No security rushed to remove her. In fact, no one even seemed to see her but me. I rubbed my eyes, blinked. She vanished just as suddenly as she appeared. I tried to tell myself it was a hallucination, maybe just the flashing lights, or my mind playing tricks. But something felt off, deeper than just a visual glitch. She wasn't done. A week later, during a hiking trip with my parents at Mount Greylock, she showed up again. Anna, my cousin, and I were about 40 minutes into the hike when I caught sight of her standing off the trail. Same look, same clothes, but this time I ran toward her, trying to confront whatever this was. The moment I got close, she vanished. I told Anna I was just burning energy, made a joke out of it, but inside I was panicking. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not my cousins. Who would believe me? But things only got worse. That night, while staying at an Airbnb near the mountain, I had a vivid nightmare. In it, Miss Andre ordered my math class to kill me. I begged them to stop, but one classmate pulled out scissors and aimed for my chest. I woke up gasping, only to find her standing right over me. Her face was twisted, screaming and laughing like some deranged puppet. I screamed for my parents, and she vanished before they burst into the room. Crying, shaking, I finally told them everything. The stairs, the concert, the mountain, the dream. I expected disbelief, but what I saw in their eyes was fear. My mom let me sleep in their bed that night, and neither of them argued when I said I never wanted to go back to that school. They didn't say it, but I think they believed me, and that terrified me more than anything. The day after the nightmare, my parents didn't send me to school. They said we'd discuss transferring later, but first they wanted me to rest and see a psychologist. I agreed without hesitation. I just wanted the visions to stop. That morning we packed and left the Airbnb early, heading back to our apartment in the city. I sat quietly in the back seat, staring out the window, hoping that whatever had followed me was left behind in the woods. But I couldn't shake the sense that she was still out there, somewhere just beyond my line of sight. When we got home, I avoided my room. I stayed in the living room with the TV on all day, even if I wasn't watching. I needed noise. I needed light. That night, I dreamed again. This time I was back in school, but the building was empty. No students, no teachers, just me and the sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway. I walked toward the noise and found Miss Andre standing at the end of the corridor, facing a window, her back turned to me. Her voice floated toward me, calm, measured. Why did you run?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was dry, my feet frozen. She turned slowly, eyes hollow, mouth stretched into a grin far too wide. "You saw me," she whispered. "So now you're mine." I jolted awake in a cold sweat, convinced she'd be there again, but the room was empty. Still, I begged my parents the next morning to let me transfer schools. This time they agreed, but there was a condition. I had to see a therapist once a week. It was a small price to pay for peace of mind. I told my friends a lie, that my parents wanted me to attend a better school, one with a stronger academic record. They bought it. I never told them the truth. That truth stayed between me, my parents, and the psychologist. In therapy, I finally spoke about everything. The stare on the street, her appearance on stage, the hallucinations, the dreams, the sense that she had stepped out of my life and into my mind. My psychologist listened without judgment, carefully, even taking notes. Eventually, they diagnosed me with stress-induced visual hallucinations and prescribed medication. Slowly, the sightings stopped. The nightmares faded. But even now, years later, I still don't know what was real and what wasn't. Because no matter how much therapy helped or how much distance I put between me and that school, I've never truly stopped looking over my shoulder. Transferring schools was the right decision. My new school felt brighter somehow, less heavy, less haunted. I made new friends, adjusted to a new routine, and with the help of weekly therapy, sessions and medication, the hallucinations stopped entirely. I never saw Miss Andre again. Not in the halls, not in my dreams, not in the shadows of my peripheral vision. It was as if she had never existed outside that narrow window of madness. But I still think about her sometimes, especially when I walk alone at night and catch the faintest reflection in a window or mirror. My therapist called it trauma residue, the mind's way of holding on to fear even after the danger has passed. Maybe that's true. Or maybe some things just leave a mark too deep to fully erase. I don't believe she was a ghost or demon, but I do believe she followed me, and part of her still lingers in the quiet just behind my eyes. Story 8. Screams in the Gravel Lot. It was supposed to be a simple road trip. Just me, my best friend Anna, and my parents heading to a theme park for the weekend. The plan was to drive 8 hours across Sweden, visit the park the next morning, and camp somewhere nearby that night. We hadn't booked a campsite in advance, which turned out to be a mistake. When we finally arrived, the whole area was packed due to a massive soccer tournament. Every campsite within a reasonable distance was full. With no other choice, we drove deeper into a nature reserve, searching for a quiet place to pitch our tents. Eventually, we found a gravel parking lot tucked away in the woods, about a 10-minute walk from the beach. It was remote, quiet, and technically legal to camp there, at least according to a kind stranger we met on a hiking trail. We set up our tents side by side, my parents in one, Anna and I in the other, and spent the evening eating snacks, laughing, and watching videos on our phones. It felt peaceful, even cozy, the kind of night you don't expect to remember. But just after midnight, as the woods settled into stillness, we heard something, sharp and metallic. A sound that didn't belong. We froze, glancing at each other in the dark. It had come from the direction of the abandoned car we'd noticed earlier. We had ignored it before. Now we couldn't. And as the gravel crunched again outside our tent, we realized we weren't alone. The sound of metal scraping against gravel jolted Anna and me into silence. We held our breaths, eyes wide, straining to hear beyond the thin fabric of the tent. Another metallic thud followed, unmistakably close. It sounded like a shovel being dropped or dragged. I remembered the beat-up car we'd seen earlier, parked, alone on the far end of the lot. At the time it had seemed harmless, just abandoned. Now it felt like a warning we'd ignored. We didn't dare unzip the tent or look outside. We just sat there, paralyzed. Then came the unmistakable sound of a trunk slamming shut, followed by tires screeching against the gravel as the car peeled away into the night. We exhaled, shaky and unsure. Maybe they were just dumping something, garbage, tools. But deep down we both knew it wasn't that simple. I texted a friend who lived near the area. His response made my stomach drop. He told me that the beach nearby had a bad reputation. Drug trafficking, criminal activity, even disappearances. The forest. Around it was known to be dangerous after dark. I didn't tell Anna everything, not yet. I didn't want to scare her more than she already was. But then 10 minutes after the car had vanished, a blood-curdling scream erupted from the woods. It was male, raw and full of pain. It tore through the silence and echoed off the trees. I immediately texted my mom, who had slept through it, and called her phone until she answered. She dismissed it at first, but I could hear the tension creeping into her voice. Anna and I huddled under the blankets, hearts racing, whispering theories we didn't believe ourselves. The woods were completely still again, too still. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, and circling our tent. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to be heard, but the gravel betrayed them. We heard them pause, walk to our parents' tent, then to our car. Then they came back. I turned off my phone screen to keep the light from giving us away. Anna gripped my arm so tightly, it hurt. I could hear the footsteps stop just outside, followed by heavy breathing, the kind you hear in horror movies when the killer's just outside the door. Then, without warning, the headlights of a car lit up our tent. I peeked through the fabric. It was the same car from before. The door slammed and it sped off again. But 5 minutes later, we heard another engine approaching, this time a police cruiser, and that's when we realized someone else had called for help. But it might have already been too late. As the flashing lights of the police cruiser disappeared, down the gravel path chasing after the car that had returned and fled again, Anna and I finally allowed ourselves to breathe, but it was short-lived. Despite the officer's brief appearance, the eerie quiet returned, wrapping around the forest like a suffocating fog. We whispered about getting into our car to feel safer, but neither of us wanted to step outside alone. Still, something in me snapped, a primal instinct maybe. I unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. The lot looked empty, but that didn't mean we were safe. After a few tense minutes, we darted to the car, locking the doors behind us, shaking but relieved to be enclosed by something solid. Anna curled up in the passenger seat, and I stayed up staring into the dark tree line. The adrenaline making my eyes burn. Just when the silence seemed to stretch too far, we heard it again, the scream. This one was even closer. I looked in the rearview mirror and caught a brief, blurry movement near the edge of the trees. Nothing distinct, just a figure, then gone. We sat frozen, afraid to even breathe too loudly. My mind reeled. Was someone hurt out there? Or worse, was it a trap? Something meant to lure us out? At some point I must have nodded off, because the next thing I remembered was Anna shaking me awake. Dawn had broken. The soft glow of morning light painted the trees gold, but the unease remained. We returned to the tent to help my parents pack, and that's when my mom admitted she'd heard the footsteps too, especially when they circled their tent. She described the breathing, heavy, intentional. Not the breath of someone lost, but someone watching, listening, stalking. My dad, who had slept through it all, was visibly shaken when we told him what happened. We didn't waste a second. We packed everything and left that gravel lot before the sun had even cleared the horizon. Later that evening, unable to stop thinking about it, I looked up the area online. There had been a murder near that forest, just months earlier. A man stabbed in a gang-related debt. 2 others had gone missing from the same beach we had been so close to. Their bodies had never been found. The more I read, the colder I felt. Whoever had walked around our tents that night, they weren't lost. They weren't innocent. They were checking, watching to see if we were awake, if we'd seen something. And maybe, just maybe, deciding if they needed to make us disappear, too. We never camped again after that night. Not in a forest, not near a beach, not anywhere that didn't have walls and locks. Even though nothing happened to us physically, something inside us shifted. Anna still brings it up sometimes, always in a half-joking tone, but I can see it in her eyes. She remembers it the same way I do. My parents refuse to talk about it at all, as if silence might erase it. But it hasn't. I still think about the scream, the shovel, the footsteps, the return of the car, and the sudden chase of the police. I think about what might have happened if we had looked out too early or stayed asleep too long. That forest was hiding something, maybe still is. Sometimes in moments of quiet I wonder who or what was buried under all that gravel. And more than that, I wonder if someone out there saw us and simply decided to let us go. Story 9. Eyes Behind the Stone. It started as a thrill-seeking dare between friends, a Halloween season tradition that had taken root in our small town in western New York. Every year, a group of us would share ghost stories, then try to one-up each other with dares based on local legends. That year, the target was Oakwood Cemetery, a crumbling graveyard on the town's outskirts, its rusted iron gate bearing the faded engraving, established 1812. No one went there after sunset. It was said the Whitaker family mausoleum at the center of the cemetery was cursed, that if you looked into its shadowed entrance too long, you'd see someone looking back. That October night, just days before Halloween, 3 of us, me, Jake, and Becca, decided to go. Armed with flashlights, teenage bravado, and an aging camcorder, we pedaled our bikes out of town and into the darkness. The air was crisp, the trees skeletal, their branches like bony fingers scratching at the stars. As we stepped through the cemetery gates, the silence swallowed us whole. Our flashlight beams danced over leaning headstones and decaying statues, casting warped shadows on the moss-covered path. Even Jake, the loudest among us, went quiet. The mausoleum loomed ahead, marble walls cracked with age, the metal door slightly ajar. I remember how cold it felt as we approached, how time seemed to pause with every step closer. We thought it would be fun, just a quick scare, maybe some fake screams for the video, but the fear that followed wasn't pretend, and it didn't end when we left. The closer we got to the Whitaker mausoleum, the heavier the air felt, like the ground itself was holding its breath. The marble structure stood in eerie contrast to the decayed headstones surrounding it. Tall, rectangular, and cracked from decades of weather, but still solid, still watching. A plaque near the doorway read, "In Memoriam, the Whitaker family, 1839. Local lore claimed they died in a house fire and were buried together, though nobody could agree on how the fire started or why their spirits never left." Jake, camera in, hand dared Becca to be the first to peek inside. She rolled her eyes, but even she hesitated before nudging the door. It gave way with a groan that echoed across the cemetery, like a sigh from something sleeping too long. The flashlight beams illuminated a dust-choked interior. Cobwebs dangled from the corners. The scent of mildew and decay hit us instantly. 3 stone slabs stood inside, partially sunken into the ground. Nothing moved. No creatures, no jump scares, nothing. Until Becca's light caught something in the far corner. Their figure, still and upright, dressed in a long white garment. We all froze. I squinted, thinking maybe it was a statue or some sort of ceremonial robe left behind, but then its head tilted, just slightly. Becca gasped. Did it just move? Jake stepped forward to get a better shot. the camcorder trembling in his grip. That's when the figure slowly lifted its head. Two faintly glowing eyes caught the beam of the flashlight, reflecting it back at us with an unnatural gleam. We didn't speak. We couldn't. The figure remained still, except for the slow rising of its chest, as if it had just remembered how to breathe. A soft rasping sound followed, like someone inhaling through ruined lungs. That was enough. "Go," Becca whispered, grabbing my arm. We spun on our heels and sprinted back down the path, past crumbling angels and broken markers, our flashlights jerking with every step. The gate creaked louder on the way out than it had going in, like it was trying to shut behind us and trap whatever we'd stirred. Once outside, we collapsed next to our bikes, gasping for breath. Jake fumbled with the camcorder, replaying the footage. It was dark, blurry, chaotic, but in one frame the figure was there, standing exactly where we saw it, just inches from the mausoleum wall. It wasn't a statue. It wasn't imagined. Something had been waiting in there, watching. And it had seen us. We should have left it alone. We should have taken the footage, buried it deep in a folder we never opened again, and let the story die in silence. But instead, Jake, caught in the high of fear and adrenaline, posted a short, edited version of the clip to our YouTube channel. The thumbnail read, "We found a ghost in a real mausoleum with a blurred still of the glowing eyes." It blew up overnight, thousands of views, comments ranging from obvious fake to "that's definitely real." At first it was thrilling, but then things started to change, strange things. Becca was the first to notice it, a shape in her backyard at night, always near the tree line, always gone when she looked again. Then Jake's bedroom window was found cracked open from the outside, even though he lived on the second floor. His camera, left on his desk, had recorded 30 seconds of static, followed by a single frame of what looked like the mausoleum interior, except the angles were wrong, as if someone had filmed it standing in the corner, alone, in the dark. And then it was me. I started waking up at 3:11 a.m. every night, gasping like I'd been held underwater. I saw shapes in my peripheral vision that vanished the second I turned. Sometimes I'd hear my name whispered from places that should have been empty. One night I couldn't take it anymore. I messaged Jake and Becca. "We need to go back. We need to put it back." I didn't even know what it was, but I felt it, something we'd disturbed, a gaze that hadn't broken since that night. We returned a week later, flashlights shaking in our hands. The gate was rustier than I remembered. The path seemed darker, the air colder. When we reached the mausoleum, the door was closed again, sealed tight. We laid the camcorder at its base along with a printed apology note, not knowing what else to offer. We didn't go inside. We couldn't. As we turned to leave, I dared a glance back. Through the cracks in the door, I saw those eyes again, dim, hollow, waiting. That was months ago. The nightmares have lessened, though the air in my room still feels heavier some nights. We've never spoken of it publicly again. The video was taken down, the account deleted, but I still wonder, did we really return what it wanted? Or is it just biding its time before stepping out of the mausoleum again? Life moved on, but the memory of that night never left us. We never went back to Oakwood Cemetery, not even during the day. None of us speak of it anymore, not because we forgot, but because remembering seems to invite it back. Jake moved to another state for college. Becca deleted all her social media. And me, I still live in town, but I never take the long way home. I never pass the cemetery gates. Sometimes, though, I catch a glimpse in a reflection or hear a creak behind a closed door, and the chill that washes over me is unmistakable. It's like the mausoleum marked us, as witnesses maybe, or intruders. We didn't break anything. We didn't steal. But we saw it. And sometimes seeing is enough. I often wonder how many others dared to look into that cracked marble doorway, and how many never looked away in time. Whatever we awakened is still in there, waiting. Story 10. The Thing Beneath the Ashes. Last October, just as the leaves in Buffalo began turning brittle and golden, I took a contract job through a small private security firm. The assignment was simple: guard an old mansion on the outskirts of town, once grand but now half consumed by fire. Years ago, the estate had caught fire under mysterious circumstances, killing 2 of its occupants and leaving the structure scorched, sagging, and utterly abandoned. Locals whispered rumors about it: strange lights at night, figures seen in the windows, cries echoing from the upper floors. I didn't believe in ghosts or cursed places. I believed in quiet paychecks and cold nights. My job was to patrol the grounds every few hours and make sure no squatters or curious teens trespassed. The property was surrounded by a tall iron fence, twisted and rusted in places. My shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m., and I worked alone. Most nights were uneventful. The silence of the place was eerie, sure, and the smell of old smoke still clung to the air like dust, but I brushed it off. That changed during my second week, when I stopped near the crumbling front steps and heard a cry, sharp and human, cut off before it could finish. It echoed through the trees like it didn't come from just inside the house, but from somewhere under it. I told myself it was an animal, but that was the first night I stopped trusting the silence, and the last night I believed I was alone. After that first cry in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that the mansion was watching me. My patrols became slower, more deliberate. I found myself lingering near the fence, scanning the upper windows for movement, even though I knew no one was supposed to be inside. On the third night following the incident, something changed. While walking behind the mansion, I saw a faint flicker of light in the topmost window, barely more than a pulse, like a candle flame struggling against the dark. There was no power running through the estate, no generators, no reason for light. I radioed it in, expecting to be told it was a trick of the wind or moonlight. Instead, dispatch was quiet for a long beat before finally answering, "Just keep an eye on it. Do not go inside." It was the first time I'd heard uncertainty in their voice. That night I couldn't resist. I climbed the front steps and gently pushed the blackened door open. The interior was exactly what I expected: charred wallpaper, sagging beams, broken glass. But the air inside was dense, like walking through invisible cobwebs. Every breath tasted like damp ash. I stuck to the front room, flashlight trembling in my hand, telling myself I'd just take a look and leave. That's when I heard it again. The same cry, clearer this time. Human, pained. And it was coming from beneath the floorboards. My light caught something near the fireplace, a patch of soot disturbed, revealing a metal ring embedded in the floor, a trapdoor. I knelt down, heart pounding, and yanked it open. A narrow staircase descended into blackness. I couldn't see more than 2 steps down. As I leaned closer, my flashlight flickered, and then something moved below. A shape, too fast to see clearly, but large and jerky, like someone crawling on all fours. The cry rose again, louder now, echoing up the stairwell. I slammed the trapdoor shut and bolted out of the house. For the rest of the shift, I sat in my car, doors locked, eyes on the mansion. Nothing else happened. No lights, no cries. Just silence, but it was different now. It felt aware. I didn't report the trapdoor. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to be believed. Or maybe part of me already knew that if I opened that door again, I wouldn't come back out. Something was under that house. Something that burned but didn't die. And it was still waiting. 2 nights later, I made the mistake of going back in. I told myself it was to confirm what I saw, to document it, maybe even bring proof to my supervisor. But deep down, I think I just wanted to know what was really under that house. The memory of that scream, the way it echoed off the stone, kept gnawing at me like a buried whisper that wouldn't quiet. I returned to the mansion just after 2 a.m., flashlight, phone, and a crowbar in hand. The trapdoor creaked open like it had been waiting, and the air that drifted up from the cellar was colder than anything I'd felt before. Damp, metallic, and wrong. The narrow staircase groaned under my weight as I descended, each step swallowed by blackness. At the bottom, the light revealed a long, narrow hallway carved into the earth, with rotting support beams and scorched stone walls. It didn't look like a basement. It looked like a tunnel. I pressed forward, trying to breathe through the rising panic. That's when I saw them. Handprints, scorched into the stone. Dozens of them, small and large, like someone had tried to claw their way out while on fire. My flashlight flickered again, and when it steadied, I saw the outline of a figure at the end of the corridor. It didn't move, but I could see its head tilted, watching, studying. The moment I whispered, "Hello?" it responded, not with words, but with the sound of a breath, deep, wet, struggling, like lungs filled with smoke. Then it charged. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran, the tunnel spinning around me, my light flaring in and out. I could hear it behind me, something dragging, slamming into walls, screaming, not with pain but rage. I flew up the steps and threw the trapdoor shut, just as something slammed into it from below. The entire floor shuddered. I dragged a fallen bookshelf over it and fled the house. I never went back. I quit the job the next day without explanation. They didn't ask. Maybe they already knew what lived under that mansion. Maybe that's why they never let us go inside. Whatever was trapped down there, it hadn't died in the fire. It had survived, it had changed. And when I looked into its shape, I felt it looking back, not just at me, but through me, like it knew my name. Like it was already learning the way out. I moved out of Buffalo less than a month after quitting that job. I told my friends it was for a fresh start, a better climate, anything but the truth. I still have nightmares, always the same. The trapdoor, creaking open, the stairs pulling me down, and something breathing just beyond the light. I tried reporting what I saw once, anonymously. Nothing came of it. The mansion still stands, rotting at the edge of town, fenced off but never torn down. A forgotten place for forgotten things. Sometimes I wonder why it was never demolished, why they still pay guards to watch it instead of burying the entire foundation in concrete. Maybe they can't. Maybe they're afraid of what might escape if the structure weakens. I've changed. My number blocked every dispatch contact and buried the memory deep. But on cold nights, I still feel that breath on my neck, and I know it remembers me too. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.